Hi friends, so I'm back with this video. This one is on hyponatremia and I hope you have seen some of my earlier videos. I'm an intensivist and physician in Gurgaon, Delhi, and in this video I will take you across hyponatremia, explaining the key concepts, trying to make it easier for you to understand this complex topic of hyponatremia and the various types and the corrections and how to find the etiology of hyponatremia. The clinical features and certain other features I will not be discussing, which are available in all the books. So how much sodium is present in 1 teaspoon of salt? If you know the answer to this, then you probably know sodium very well and you do not need to attend this lecture. So 5 grams contains 85 milliequivalents of sodium, as 1 gram contains 17 milliequivalents. Sir Humphrey Davy here is the discoverer of sodium, and this is just to show you that he tried to use poetry and theatre to bring science to life, to bring it to the layman. And this is to give you an approach to hyponatremia right in the very beginning, and we shall discuss this entire thing in our video, how this comes about and how to treat this, and more importantly how to understand this. So you can see here that the volume status is very important and is divided into hypovolemic, euvolemic and hypervolemic, and then there is a further subclassification on the basis of urine sodium, which is a very important test. So different types of distribution of sodium and water are there, like we just saw, and this is normal with sodium in blue and this entire cylinder showing water. And this is hypovolemic here. As you can see, water content has decreased, but sodium is decreased even more. And then this is euvolemic, and this is hypervolemic, where sodium is increased, but water is increased much more. So what do we have? We have total body water and sodium vary from normal, that we have just seen, and there is more water relative to sodium in the body. That is the key. So I think this should be clear to you. That is the essence of hyponatremia. Now to just delve a little more deeply into this, antidiuretic hormone secreted from the posterior pituitary is very important. It is the key hormone which determines your serum sodium. And serum sodium actually determines your serum osmolarity. It is the main ion in the plasma which contributes to osmolarity. So the stimuli for ADH secretion is serum osmolarity, most of it, and sometimes it is the effective arterial circulating volume. Now aldosterone plays a small role because aldosterone is responsible for absorption of sodium. ADH only absorbs water. So in certain states, aldosterone absorbs more sodium than required, and the absorbed sodium regulates the osmolarity of the serum. But the final call is taken by the ADH hormone secretion. ADH is secreted to regulate the osmolarity between 280 and 295. So ultimately what do you get? Ultimately you get that ADH determines the total body water and thus the serum sodium and the serum osmolarity. Aldosterone only absorbs the small amount of sodium, but final call is taken by the secretion of antidiuretic hormone from the pituitary gland, where the blood which is circulating around the pituitary gland is sensed by the osmoreceptors in the posterior pituitary, which secrete the antidiuretic diuretic hormone. Now I talked about, look here, I talked about the serum osmolarity being the major determinant, but effective arterial circulating volume is also very important. And if you see here, this is euvolemic, right? And this is 280 to 295 normal osmolarity. So if it is hypovolemic, then despite your osmolarity being low, if the osmolarity is low, then ADH should be lesser in amount. But the body is designed to maintain the effective circulating volume, and it overrides the hypoosmolar signals, right? Similarly, in hypervolemia, despite an increased osmolarity, it actually works the other way around. So I hope you understand here. You can look at this and you will understand. The effective arterial circulating volume has an overriding effect on the osmolar signals to the posterior pituitary. If there is a contrast distinction between the two. Now ADH acts on V2 receptors in the renal tubules, and it increases the aquaporin water channels, leading to increased water absorption. And the stimuli are nausea, vomiting, pain, general anesthesia, and what I have listed right there. Now, true hyponatremia is always hypoosmolar. That should be clear, and a good history and exam tells you the diagnosis most of the times rather than a battery of tests. And there is something known as pseudohyponatremia. So this is pseudohyponatremia, which has either a normal osmolarity or a hyperosmolarity. Why is it called pseudohyponatremia despite the sodium being low? Because it is not important clinically. Clinically, it does not cause the symptoms which true hyponatremia causes. So pseudohyponatremia is actually a lab artifact seen in conditions of hyperproteinemia like myeloma or hyperlipidemia. But the hyperlipidemia, the values of cholesterol and triglycerides have to be really high. And I have not really seen this. Myeloma, yes, myeloma you do get hyponatremia all the time. Then hyperosmolar is mannitol, and hyperglycemia, mainly glycine is more or less isoosmolar, and mannitol, we know initially it causes hyponatremia because it draws in water, and hyperglycemia also, it draws in water. So the osmolarity you should actually get from the lab, but you can also calculate it, and if you are using blood urea, then it has to be divided by 5.6. So the lab osmolarity and your calculated osmolarity should be within 10 osmoles per liter to be accurate. Then this is serum osmolarity. So the normal serum osmolarity is 280 to 295, which I've already told you, and it is very important to maintain serum osmolarity across all compartments, your intravascular, your extracellular, and your intracellular. Otherwise, what happens is that the cells will either burst open or shrink and lyse, like it is shown here. That is why it is very important to maintain the serum sodium concentration within the normal range, because though sodium is mainly extracellular, it affects the water distribution. So changes in sodium affect changes in water content of the cells, because sodium is not able to move across the membrane of these cells, but water is able to move across because it tries to equalize the osmolarity. And if the cells become hypoosmolar or hyperosmolar, then this is what happens. Now the formula for correction of hyperglycemia, which I just showed in the previous slide, is that for every 100 milligram per deciliter of blood sugar above 100, subtract 2 of sodium. That will tell you whether hypoglycemia alone is causing the pseudohyponatremia or whether there is actual hyponatremia with the hyperglycemia, because that can also happen. Now we will just take some cases. So this is a 18-year-old girl who has come with history of vomitings for 2 days, and she has a low sodium, but she is actually asymptomatic and urea is slightly high and pH is alkalotic, potassium is 3.2. So is there any need for sending any test here? Actually no, because vomiting is a very common cause of low sodium, and diarrhea is not so commonly associated with hyponatremia. It may be hyponatremia or hypernatremia, because vomiting actually stimulates ADH, and we will just see this in the next slide. And diarrhea does not stimulate ADH. Loose motions don't stimulate ADH, only vomiting. So diarrhea normally causes hypernatremia, may cause hyponatremia sometimes. Then vomiting is the mechanism here. There is increased hypotonic fluid losses in the vomiting and increased ADH due to stimuli by vomiting. This is very important. And on top of that, you take in free water, that is without any salt, or you are given IV free water, that is not fluid which is not isotonic. So you end up getting diluted fluid, and in vomiting you are losing fluid with a significant amount of salt, so you end up with hyponatremia. And if you were to do a urine sodium, then you may get sodium more than 30 or less than 30. In conditions of hypovolemic hyponatremia, as we go on, we just see this. So here I'll just show you the flow chart. So for hypovolemic hyponatremia, if you want to get to the etiology and it is not clear, please send the urine sodium, and this is the flow chart for the etiology: urine sodium more than 30 and less than 30. So we shall take up a couple of these cases and I will just show them to you. Now before that, is my patient hypovolemic? This is very important to distinguish it from euvolemic state of hyponatremia. Like I told you in the beginning, either there is hypovolemic hyponatremia or there is euvolemic or hypervolemic. Hypervolemic is easy, but hypovolemic and euvolemic one has to distinguish. So one takes the history of any fluid losses in terms of vomiting, diarrhea, fevers. Then one takes the drug history, whether any diuretics were being given. Then one examines the patient, what is the tachycardia is there or not, and what is the blood pressure, what is the stroke volume, what is the mentation, the urine output. Then one can look at the renal labs, a urea creatinine ratio of more than 40 or a urine sodium of greater than 30, whether the IVC is collapsed totally. So all these things will tell you whether the patient is hypovolemic or not. Then another condition that was listed was pancreatitis, peritonitis, burns, which lead to a lot of fluid losses with sodium content. So this will lead to hyponatremia only if you replace them with dilute fluids with sodium content absent or very little. So dilute fluids, if you give to these patients which are having no sodium or very little sodium, then they will lead to hyponatremia only then. Now this is a patient of polytrauma and traumatic brain injury with subarachnoid hemorrhage, amputation, fractures, and he has these lab features. CVP is only 1. So this is a patient of cerebral salt wasting, and because he's had traumatic brain injury and subarachnoid hemorrhage, he's having cerebral salt wasting. So these patients actually lose a lot of salt and water in the kidneys because of not very clear etiology, possibly due to natriuretic peptides, which lead to loss of saline like fluid and salt in the kidneys. And the treatment is that you give a lot of saline to these patients, and here the CVP will be very low, or if you look at the IVC will be very collapsed, and urine sodium is extremely high. So these patients are actually neurosurgical patients who actually develop this cerebral salt wasting, and sometimes these patients get SIDH also, which is euvolemic. So we shall talk about SIDH soon. Now, correction of hypovolemic hyponatremia in general is with saline because they are hypovolemic, and saline has 154 milliequivalents of sodium per liter, which is actually more than their serum sodium because they'll be having less than 135 milliequivalents per liter and they are hypovolemic, so they will get corrected. But how and with what rate are you going to give this saline? You know, there are different formulae given by which you can estimate the sodium correction, but this does not always apply because what happens is that you cannot control entirely the rate of urine sodium excretion. The moment you start giving your saline, the ADH secretion decreases and the patient starts pouring out dilute urine. So the sodium jumps, and this can happen rather randomly. So you have to monitor with frequent sodium, serum sodium, and adjust your infusion rates. And sometimes you may use 3% in these patients if they are having moderate symptoms at the rate which I have written. So there is no fixed infusion rate. This is an arbitrary number to start with, and saline can be started at around 100 ml per hour. This is just to show you an example here, and this is a normal brain, and you have the blood vessel with hyponatremia, and you have water crossing across the cell membrane, and this is a swollen neuron and the swollen brain. So this is what happens in hyponatremia. So if you look at it here, I showed you acute hyponatremia, and this is actually rapid correction of chronic hyponatremia. So in this rapid onset of acute hyponatremia, which I just showed you, there is brain swelling which leads to cerebral edema and which can lead to herniation. So that is the problem with acute hyponatremia because it acts very rapidly, the sodium fall on the brain. And here if you correct chronic hyponatremia rapidly, then you get osmotic demyelination if the jump in sodium is very rapid. And here you can see the neurons are getting demyelinated. So the distinction between acute and chronic is of 48 hours because in 48 hours the brain is able to adapt to the hyponatremia which has set in and thereby decrease the swelling which has occurred within itself. So acute and chronic are distinguished at 48 hours. If you do not know the duration of hyponatremia and the patient has come to you, you assume that it is chronic. Then we come to SIDH and other euvolemic hyponatremia. So SIDH is called syndrome of inappropriate antidiuretic hormone, and it is called inappropriate because the ADH secretion is excess of the osmolarity. You know, the true hyponatremia is hypoosmolar, and if it is hypoosmolar, then ADH secretion should decrease and try to bring it back to a normal osmolarity. But here the ADH secretion persists, thereby the hyponatremia persists, and that is why it is called inappropriate. And the stimuli for ADH secretion in excess comes from CNS disease, pulmonary disease, certain drugs and cancer. CNS disease because they are sitting right next to the pituitary in the brain and they influence ADH secretion. Pulmonary disease because of hypoxia and hypercapnia being a stimuli for ADH. And drugs go and act centrally, and sometimes they increase the sensitivity of ADH on the renal tubules. And similarly, cancer actually secretes ADH hormone. And so there is a very rare variant wherein the ADH is low, but there is a mutation in the renal tubules in the receptors of ADH, thereby leading to persistent ADH stimulation as far as the receptors are concerned in the renal tubules. So urine sodium is more than 30 to 40 in these patients, and urine osmolarity is always more than 100 and generally more than 400. So this is one condition which has to be distinguished from hypovolemic, because when the patient comes to you, you will not know the volume status. You have to sort it out as to whether he is euvolemic or hypovolemic and then proceed accordingly. And of course your tests will help you to some extent, but mind you, urine sodium and these tests are not always accurate, especially urine sodium. So this is an approach to your patient with euvolemia, and urine sodium is more than 30 in most of these patients, as you can see here, and this is associated with excessive ADH secretion in all these conditions except primary polydipsia and low solute intake. In both these conditions, the urine osmolarity is less than 200, is less than 100, and it is very important to know this because this is where your urine osmolarity comes into play. These are the two conditions. So in primary polydipsia, what happens is that the patient goes on drinking a lot of water and is primarily seen in psychiatric patients. So the entire system, the entire body becomes dilute with water and he passes out urine which has a very low osmolarity, which is less than 100. The lowest you can get is 50. So this is where urine osmolarity comes into play. Then second is low solute intake. Low solute intake is seen in beer drinkers who take in a lot of beer and don't eat too much. So that is again another way of consuming a lot of water and not taking in too much of food, and thereby not generating enough of urea and other molecules. So they also have a urine osmolarity of less than 100. So this is about euvolemic hyponatremia. And this is a nice painting by Vincent van Gogh showing you beer potomaniacs sitting in a beer cafe. This is an example of psychiatric patient. So these two conditions, urine osmolarity is very important. And psychiatric patient tend to have the psychiatric disorder, so they will take in a lot of water sometimes, and also the psychiatric drugs because of anticholinergic action cause thirst, so they tend to take in a lot of water. Now this lady is again come with hyponatremia with a low GCS, and she is hypertensive, right? So she is hypertensive. So what is the cause here? Possible it is thiazides. So elderly ladies who are hypertensive on medication often develop hyponatremia because of thiazides. This is not so common in elderly males and is mainly in females and has to do something with estrogen, but it is not clearly delineated. And what mechanism is postulated I've shown you here, and it behaves like SIDH, and the treatment is mainly you stop the thiazides and replace it with some other antihypertensive. Now this gentleman here, he has come with pneumonia and he has thrown a seizure and he recovers and he is sent home. But then he is readmitted with pain abdomen and a CT shows a mass lesion. Right. So what does he have? He also has SIDH. Initially, there was a pneumonia which caused the SIDH. Subsequently, he was found to have a malignancy causing SIDH. Now, after 24 hours, his sodium has jumped to 139, which is rapid correction, and we find him quadriplegic with eye movements only. So, what do you think has happened now? So, what has happened now is that he has developed central pontine myelinosis, which is now called osmotic demyelination. So on the right you can see there is demyelination occurring in the pons and other areas. So earlier it was called central pontine myelinosis and now it is called ODM. The reason being that earlier it was thought only pons could be affected, but now it is realized other areas could be affected also, and pons is affected most of the times and early because the neurons are more susceptible in the pons. This is an example here how you should proceed if the patient develops osmotic demyelination. As you can see on day 4, the patient here has developed coma and pyramidal signs, and the correction has been somewhat rapid, though not that rapid, but they can develop. So there, if you develop these signs of ODM, then you have to bring it down. You have to bring the sodium down. And how do you bring it down? By giving 5% dextrose or desmopressin. So you bring it down and then you gradually bring it up. And often there is a full neurological recovery as shown here. So this is important to know this because this happens sometimes. But what is the treatment of SIDH in general? You have to achieve water restriction and negative fluid balance. And you can use some Lasix, you can use Vaptans. Vaptans cannot be used for more than 3 months, and when you give them you have to be very careful because sometimes they cause intense water diuresis and jump in the serum sodium. You can also give oral salt, remembering that 1 tablespoon contains 1 teaspoon rather contains 85 milliequivalents. And treatment of SIDH is not so simple because achieving water restriction is not so easy and you have to treat the underlying cause. Now, which test should be used in hyponatremia? So one is serum osmolarity because it establishes true hyponatremia. Then urine sodium, I've already showed you the importance. Then urine osmolarity less than 100 in the two conditions of beer potominia and in primary polydipsia. That is how it helps. More than that is seen in all other conditions. And sometimes uric acid helps because uric acid is increased in hypovolemic hyponatremia, but in SIDH it is decreased because ADH acts on the renal tubules and helps in the excretion of uric acid. So value of less than 4 milligram per deciliter is the cutoff. And thyroid function, cortisol for hypothyroidism and for adrenal insufficiency, and whether you are achieving a negative water balance in SIDH can be determined by a urine sodium plus potassium over sodium ratio. Now, urine sodium, I've told you earlier, but just to kind of make you more aware of this, you can see here a urine sodium of less than 30 is because of hypovolemic hyponatremia, and exceptions are when there is a decreased effective circulating volume like CHF, ascites, and active vomiting, it may be plus minus, and third spacing. So these are conditions which are associated with fluid overload, but because they are actually having intravascular depletion in a way that is decreased effective circulating volume, their urine sodium is less than 30. Then if you look here, urine sodium more than 30 is seen in all these conditions, And please send your urine sodium before starting saline or 3%, otherwise the values get altered. And sometimes there is a dual etiology of hyponatremia, and urine sodium is not always reflective. Sometimes it can be inaccurate, especially if there are underlying diseases, other diseases, or if there is impairment in the kidney or in the elderly. Now, hypervolemic hyponatremia is seen in CHF, in CKD, in AKI, in ascites, in nephrotic syndrome, all states associated with volume overload. And hypervolemic hyponatremia, this is the flow chart. A urine sodium of less than 30 is seen in cirrhosis, in cardiac failure, in nephrotic syndrome, and urine sodium greater than 30 in acute or chronic renal failure. So, why is it that you get hyponatremia in renal failure? And the answer is that the failing kidney retains more water than sodium. And when you dialyze, you have to make sure that these patients' sodium rises slowly and there is no rapid rise. Otherwise, you will get osmotic demyelination. And then there are salt wasting nephropathies, which are actually hypovolemic nephropathies causing hyponatremia because they have a lot of fluid and salt losses. And in the polyuric phase of AKI and nephrotic syndrome, I've just told you. Then this is the mechanism in CHF and ascites of hyponatremia. If you have been following the lecture till now, you must have understood that there is a decreased effective circulating volume which decreases renal perfusion, and this is sensed in the macula densa, increased aldosterone, then increased sodium retention and water retention and secondary water retention. But at the same time, decreased effective circulating volume leads to increased ADH. Because if you remember earlier, I told you that it is very important for the body to maintain the circulating volume. So even if there is a hypoosmolar state in your circulation, the decreased effective circulating volume overrides this and makes the posterior pituitary secrete ADH. This is very important. That is why the sodium absorption is very avid in this, and water retention is very avid, and the urine sodium is less than 30. So this is just to show you the absorption here of sodium under the influence of aldosterone, and here to show you water absorption under the effect of ADH. Then treatment of hypervolemic hyponatremia is treat the underlying cause, and water restriction, diuretics, salt restriction, and it is mostly asymptomatic because this hyponatremia develops very slowly. It is mostly asymptomatic. So rapid correction is not required. Treat the underlying disease, restrict the salt and water, and give the diuretics. That is what we do in CHF, and that is what we do in ascites. And renal failure, you all know, is more or less the same, and if it is really bad, then one has to dialyze. Then acute hyponatremia has to be treated acutely with 3% normal saline, because I showed you it causes brain edema, and these are some of the conditions which can cause acute hyponatremia. So any hyponatremia which is known to occur within 48 hours has to be treated urgently because there is risk of brain herniation. And here you can see these are the guidelines, US guidelines and European guidelines, and you can follow either. We follow the European guidelines, and the treatment on top is for acute or symptomatic hyponatremia, which has to be treated with boluses of 150 ml 3% saline till the symptoms resolve. 2-3 times you can repeat it, right? And then in moderate symptoms you can give one bolus, and you can look here for yourself. This is for chronic hyponatremia in SIADH and hypovolemic hyponatremia and hypervolemic hyponatremia. So this is the treatment. Most important is the treatment of acute or symptomatic hyponatremia, severely symptomatic, where you have to give boluses of 3% and rapidly rise the sodium so that the patient becomes less symptomatic, and because the serum sodium rises, the risk of herniation is obviated. So when should I give 3% normal saline? You should give 3% normal saline apart from what I just told you in mild to moderate symptomatic patients in hypovolemia also can be given, an IV bolus in the patients who are acute or having severe symptoms like seizures. Now we will just go through the common errors in correction that you correct rapidly, and if you correct rapidly, as it may happen, then you have to bring it down like I just told you, with either 5% dextrose or with your desmopressin sprays. And then faster correction is not done in severely symptomatic with boluses of 3% normal saline. Then 3% is used for CHF, ascites, CKD. Please do not use 3%. You will be loading them with salt. NS should not be given for SIDH because it leads to only worsening of symptoms. Sodium does not get corrected, only water gets retained. Then do not treat asymptomatic greater than 120 sodium aggressively. Then use of Vaptans should be a little more liberal in those cases where SIDH and CHF is not getting corrected. And this one I have already told you that overcorrection should be recorrected. And please do not think that ODM is not correctable. It often responds to treatment. And once again, the flowchart we started with, we are back there. If you can go through this once again, I think by now you would have understood how to approach hyponatremia, and this is a very nice flowchart taken from Brenner's. So finally we are coming to the end. ADH determines total body water and aldosterone determines total body sodium. Now, a final question is whether a patient who's taking a salt-free diet, can he get hyponatremia? Something to think about. So such instances have been noted in hypertensive patients and in certain food fads. So the answer is yes, because the body requires at least 30 milliequivalents of sodium minimum. And if your diet in some way does not contain 30 milliequivalents, then you can get hyponatremia on a salt-free diet. And it happens sometimes. I have seen such patients. They are mainly been hypertensive patients who completely eliminate salt from their diet. So the take-home message, try to take a good history and examination, and try to categorize into hypovolemia, euvolemic and hypervolemic. And if you want to send your urine sodium or any test, please send it before starting any 3% or normal saline if possible. And if the patient has very low GCS or seizures, then you have to treat acutely with boluses of 3% saline, 100 to 150 ml, and should be repeated every 15 minutes till the patient improves for around 2-3 boluses. And the urine osmolarity is important test only for making out the two types of hyponatremia I told you. And then one has to think of the other causes in terms of pseudohyponatremia at times, and the psychiatric patient should not be forgotten. Sometimes he is always there. So with that, I think I will end the lecture, and these some of the references for you. If you want to further understand, you can send a message to me or mail to me, whatever you like. I hope you found it useful. Thank you for your patient hearing.